If you've been gaming for a long time, you probably have an opinion about Ubisoft games. Ubisoft as a company, their design approach, what they're infamous for, and what they used to be famous for, but they're not particularly famous for anymore. Hey, that's a rhyme. God, I'm white. I ran a poll, and unsurprisingly, people are very unhappy with Ubisoft right now. 1% of people strongly approve of Ubisoft, the true Ubisofters. But the Ubisofter coalition is hugely outweighed by the strongly disapproved coalition. So John Ubisoft, going off of the polling, I don't think it's a dead heat. I think you can confidently say this guy is not winning re-election. Having a negative opinion about the situation right now, especially with Siege, is not particularly a, incoherent place to be. There are lots of reasons to be unhappy about what's going on, but this video isn't going to talk as much about Siege. It's going to talk about Ubisoft as a company and their reputation and where it comes from. So I'm going to talk about the story there. Ubisoft, in general, isn't just facing heat for Rainbow Six Siege. They've faced heat over the years for a number of different products that they have worked on. But I think the reason that they seem to get a unique amount of heat, especially recently, is because we remember what Ubisoft titles used to be like. There was a certain level of production quality that you got out of an Assassin's Creed game, for instance, that was very different than everything else at the time. They found a formula with the open world shebang, and for a little while, we had some really good entries in that formulaic kind of mold, even if it, did get a little bit samey by the third time around. Assassin's Creed 1 through 3, right, including the Assassin's Creed 2, I guess, all the games that they did with Ezio, because Ezio was such a popular character, were for the most part received pretty well. And then Assassin's Creed 3, particularly with the ship combat, set up basically just, okay, let's do a pirate game, and that's how you got Assassin's Creed Black Flag, which was, equal parts action game, action stealth combat game, and swashbuckling pirate adventure. Were these games realistic? Hell no! These games weren't realistic at all. They took a ton of creative liberties. Gladiator is not a realistic movie. It takes a ton of creative liberties, but it feels real. That's the point. And in an entertainment medium, that's the point that I always try to emphasize when we talk about critiquing media. It's okay if something isn't real as long as it feels like it. As long as you can trick somebody's brain, and as long as you can keep somebody entertained, it's fine. It's fine. But with Ubisoft titles relatively recently, it doesn't seem like everybody is on the same page. When Assassin's Creed Black Flag came out, it seemed like everybody was really involved. You could feel that those devs really wanted to sell the cool factor of being a pirate captain. And then when we get to Skull and Bones, you can't even board ships in a pirate game. It happens abstractly. It's this thing that just kind of takes place in the background. You hit a button and then the ship is boarded. When you remind the player that you have cut corners in order to put the product out, the more reminders that you give your player, hey, I am developing a product. Are you consuming the product? Are you having fun? Every single time you send a mental message like that to your player, that's a great way to irritate them. Another good example of this is Far Cry. Far Cry 6 had so many good ideas. I loved the environments. The characters, the dialogue is all pretty decent. Does it take a ton of creative liberties? Yeah. It's not a realistic game. But I can tell that to a certain extent, the art team and the creative side of the game, those guys are all having a ton of fun with it. But then when it gets into the substance and the actual shooting mechanics, the AI is dumb as a bag of rocks. You can just stealth your way for the entire thing. There's no sense of urgency. There's no sense of threat involved with anything that you're doing. It doesn't really get into, the gritty kind of stuff that I would presume a guerrilla game would probably try to lean into if they really wanted to go the extra mile. It feels very cookie cutter and formulaic. And I'm reminded constantly, okay, I'm playing a video game. 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 It's okay to be reminded that I'm playing a video game sometimes, but when it happens again and again and again and again, then we start to see the problem. And that's how I feel about a lot of Ubisoft single-player games recently. I don't feel like I'm playing a video game. I feel like I'm interacting with a product that has been designed for my entertainment. A good example of how this dichotomy was avoided was with The Division. Despite The Division having a ton of server issues, bugs, glitches, all sorts of nonsense that transpired with that particular release, and certain kinds of design decisions that were like, I don't know about that, right? The Dark Zone had some good ideas, but in practice, you just had a lot of guys that were overleveled, just bullying the crap out of people who were underleveled, and that felt really weird for a game that had attack shootery vibe, even though it wasn't an attack shooter, it was an RPG. But you know, that's all a big that's a big mess that we can talk about at another time. Despite that, despite those issues, I can tell that the creative team had a ton of fun working on this game because the environments are so richly detailed and the weather is realistic feeling, the atmosphere is incredible, and I just want to keep exploring the world. I can ignore the ham-fisted, marvelly dialogue sometimes because Joe Farrow is a really cool and compelling character who feels like a real person.
Now you all know what we're doing here and how important it is. You all know what's gonna happen if we don't burn this thing out. There's people counting on us. Our families, our friends, the whole damn world. And I don't care if they say they're from the government. You know they're lying.
Now, it's good to bring up The Division because The Division released before a ton of negative reports concerning Ubisoft's workplace culture started to surface in the media. There were boycotts, criticisms of the company's leadership, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla, for instance, is a game that was affected by these workplace issues. We had Ghost Recon Breakpoint, which was such a big nothing burger when that dropped. I think some of the tax shooter YouTubers still like they'll load a bunch of mods and then they kind of make it, you know, a little tax shootery, which is interesting. I think that shows that there's still evidence of those kinds of bones within the Tom Clancy license that you can leverage to that effect, which is cool. I'm glad that that's still around, but I still would have really, really preferred if they had given the game a better treatment on release. Watch Dogs Legion had some new mechanics, but it was, again, still, you know, pretty similar to the previous Watch Dogs games. And there seems to be this pattern with Ubisoft where, and this is applicable to so many different AAA companies, but Ubisoft in particular seems to have this habit of, okay, well, this license is already super popular, so we don't really have to do a whole lot. And it shows. It really shows in how it often feels like there were the bones for something, but it needs to meet a production deadline. So then the devs do what they can, and then, you know, you get something that's just kind of and it's passable, like it works. I'm sure that a lot of people would still play it and really like it. I'm sure there's, you know, at least a couple of you watching this video that loved Watch Dogs Legion or loved Far Cry 6. But when we're talking about products at scale, especially video games that have to be able to appeal to so many different people in so many different clusters of population player data sets, it just, at scale, the problem starts to become much more evident. And that's why, despite guys like SkillUp talking about, let's say, Star Wars Outlaws, for example, Star Wars Outlaws has all the potential to be a really good game. I haven't seen anything in the press or the marketing that would indicate, okay, this is going to be bad. Like, if I were to make a call, if I were gambling, I don't think it would be sensible to say, this is bad, I'm betting $100 on it. But at the same time, when you attach Outlaws to these weird monetization practices, we have all these different pricing models for superfluous, weird, random crap that I don't know how people keep buying this stuff, and it's working, apparently, because why would they keep doing it? But they do it anyway. Why? Because they can get away with it. That's the truth of the situation. And a company doing something because they can get away with it doesn't mean that, you know, I feel great about it. And that's just kind of a crappy feeling as a consumer. We fast forward to now, and we go from Black Flag to whatever the heck was going on with Skull and Bones, and that infamous statement from Yves Guillemot about a quadruple A game. I think it's safe to say that Ubisoft's optics are probably the worst they've ever been. Between the way that Rainbow Six Siege has been handled in terms of its long-term live service planning, we're talking about having 100 characters at one point, and we can't get people into games that are fair and consistent with competitive principles. That's a long way of saying the cheating thing is out of control for ranked matchmaking. We have a number of issues and what seems to be lack of transparency in terms of how the content is being rolled out. It seems like we're not being transparent about the limitations of the dated architecture that the game is running on, and we want to get to 100 characters. Again, Rainbow Six, the team, could prove me wrong by the time we get to year 10. I think that is a valid thing to look out for. But as it stands right now in the summer of 2024, the mental stock of Ubisoft is not very high. And the reason that's not very high doesn't really have to do particularly with Rainbow Six Siege. Rainbow Six Siege is just one piece of the puzzle. One of the examples of Ubisoft being aware of their reputation, you know, I think to a certain degree, was Assassin's Creed Mirage and how heavily that game was marketed as a return to form of the original Assassin's Creed games instead of what we basically got being an action RPG with character leveling and skills and all that, that you would typically find in an action RPG ever since Assassin's Creed Origins. From an anecdotal point of view, I stopped playing the Assassin's Creed games when they started doing this. Not necessarily because I thought the game was bad. I didn't think that making an RPG style game was bad. Maybe the game wasn't necessarily badly designed, but I was not playing Assassin's Creed for that purpose. That wasn't the kind of game that I wanted. When I took the Assassin's Creed brand, I had a particular kind of association with it. This is what we call audience capture. It's the same reason why so many years ago, when I brazenly tried to pivot away from Siege with this channel, it just didn't work because it was too late to pivot away from Siege. I had already spent years and years and years covering Siege content, so my particular style of commentary had been associated with Siege. The only way to break out of audience capture, right, in the algorithmic age is to start over. Now, it's not a perfect one-to-one analogy, but that's kind of what it felt like with Assassin's Creed, at least for me. I didn't necessarily care that Ubisoft wanted to make an RPG. I just didn't understand why at the time they needed to do it with Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed was known for its parkour, its instant kills, its sensational and, very Errol Flynn action adventure kind of sword combat. When I played Assassin's Creed, I was transported to a completely different world and I felt like I was really there. When I saw a bunch of numbers pop up that said, okay, your stats, you need 15% chance, blah, 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 that completely ruined the fantasy for me. And it's true of a lot of different things. It's very, very difficult to rebrand like that in business. It just didn't work due to the fact that games are such a commonly purchased commodity. Usually, news cycles and negative press. Sometimes there will be episodes where negative press or developer decisions will affect the bottom line, but most of the time, people will just keep consuming product. And that's not necessarily a fault of the players, but it does get to a certain point at which I start to wonder how much of it is complaining for the sake of complaining and getting clicks on the internet, or how much of it is genuine, because I think it's a mix of both sometimes. For those reasons, like I said, with this particular channel, as it pertains especially to Ubisoft, when Ubisoft does something that I think is a good idea, I'm going to point it out. Because if you want to talk about gaming in good faith, you have to be able to understand that companies as big as Ubisoft are comprised of tons and tons of people that all can be completely separate from each other and working on different things and making different decisions. It's easy to look at a situation like Skull and Bones and rage post about it and talk about how this is so awful, it's indicative of everything wrong with the industry, But you can also talk about that from the perspective of the people that are working on the freaking thing, that are busting their ass, and what are they getting out of it? They're not responsible for corporates' inability to manage their products and plan ahead. GameRanks has an excellent video talking about the situation that took place with Skull and Bones that I think everybody should check out. And they talk about it from the business end point of view, how Ubisoft has all these different moving parts and they allocated things to places where it didn't need to be, and how these guys at Ubisoft Singapore were just constantly strong-armed by the top brass when they needed to be making more concerted decisions for themselves on the ground instead of having to make everything go through this bureaucratic approval process. All in all, I think that gaming is a difficult industry to be in, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay for companies to make it more difficult on themselves. Ubisoft being no exception. Hope you enjoyed today's Yap Sesh. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Deuces.